I'm so pleased today to have Gavin Sharpe, who is one of our contributors as a moderator on the men's group on Thursday mornings, but he has graciously agreed to come on this webinar series and be sharing about the topic of boundaries. I know that there's such a challenge for people, both the addict and the partner. So we thought this would be a really useful resource for people to understand, have some more background and have the ability to ask some specific questions about that. So Gavin, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'd like you to introduce, your background a little bit, what, some of the work that you've been doing, and then we'll get started.
Tammy, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. So to the team at Seeking Integrity, appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. So yes, as Tammy said, it's Gavin Sharpe, and I'm a UK qualified psychotherapist. I'm a certified sex addiction therapist. I am also a qualified sex therapist. And despite that British accent, I live and work in the south of France. We moved here about 6 years ago for sunny climate and slightly warmer weather than the British weather. So I have a practice which is called Riviera Wellbeing, and I work with individuals and couples who have experienced all different types of trauma. And a significant part of my practice is working with sex addiction, unsurprisingly. And I work with both the addicts and I work with the betrayed partners and of course the couples. And when Tammy said, why don't we do something on boundaries, I just jumped at it because I think boundaries is something which just infiltrates every single part of the work in recovery. I mean, forget recovery, boundaries is there throughout our life, and having a healthy boundary and healthy boundaries is such a key to healthy living. So here's what I'd like to do just to start. And I'm going to invite everyone just to have a moment of reflection. And I'm going to give you a hypothetical example. And I would like you to think about, and you can post if you want in the chat, but just more think about for yourself how this situation might have been dealt with as a child. So I want you to imagine that as a child, maybe you're 4 or 5 years old. This is to everyone, to addict, to betrayed partner. So you fall over and you cut your knee and mom is there. How does mom react? I want to know, does mom do one of the following 3 things? Does mom freak out? And does mom say, oh my God, this is awful. I think you might need your leg amputated. This is just absolutely dreadful. This is the last thing I need because I'm really busy and I have to sort out the shopping. And now this is terrible for me. And I've got a headache. And so all of this kind of drama. Does mom say, there you are with your bleeding knee? And does mom say, you're fine, get up? And yeah, but mom, it really hurts. I think, no, you're fine. It's okay. We need to go because I'm busy and I have to get you to school and then I have to do other stuff. Or does mom say, let me take a look at it. I think it's going to be okay. Let me just dab it with the tissue I have in my purse and we might need to take you to the doctor. Does it hurt? Let me kiss it better. And I give you that example, which is obviously embellished for the drama, because one of the things I would like to share at the start is how do boundaries get set up? And they get set up because everything that we learn about boundaries, we learn from our childhood. So now let's go back to my example. In that first case where mom is freaking out and mom is panicking, it's quite possible that actually in that example, I'm going to end up with very porous boundaries as an adult, because actually there's an element of neglect there's neglect in the first and in the second. But I might find it difficult to say no to other people growing up. I may not be able to ask for what I need, because what I learned as a child is that when I asked for what I needed, mom made it about her. The boundaries were all blurred. And in the second example where mom said, I think I did this the way I did it. The second example where mom said, get up, you're fine. Mom's quite dismissive. And again, what I'm going to learn there is very similar. I'm not going to ask for help. I probably are going to have a tendency to not form very healthy relationships. And I may well have very rigid boundaries because what I learned is that you can't rely on anybody. So I'm going to keep people out. So I'm going to come back to this, but I just wanted to start and have people reflect on, because sometimes when I use that example, it's very striking and someone says, wow, I now realize growing up, mum made it about her. We're not blaming mum because maybe she was in an unhappy relationship, maybe mum's dealing with depression, but I've just realized that that's what happened. Or I just realized there was no time for me. So boundaries get set up in childhood. And what a boundary is for me is about self-respect and what I need to feel safe in my everyday life and crucially in my relationships. And in many respects, boundaries got nothing to do with the other person. Boundaries are about what I need to feel safe. And where it gets really messy and complicated is because I have to exist in relation to other people. So how do I ask for what I need? So another definition that I love, which is what the definition that Brene Brown uses, which is a boundary is what's okay and what's not okay in a relationship. And I think for whether we're the addict or whether we're the betrayed partner, we need to be, now we're in recovery, we have to work out whatever happened in the past is past. What do I need to go forward to be safe? So that's for me what boundaries are about. And Henry Cloud has written a book, a really great book on boundaries, and says boundaries define your soul. I love that. They define your soul. They help guard and maintain it. So boundaries are, if you like, a kind of a psychological fence that's between me and someone else. And we can have all different types of boundaries. We can have a time boundary. How do I use my time? We can have communication boundaries. How do I want my addict to talk to me going forward, given everything we've gone through? Or how do I want my betrayed spouse, who might be really angry and hurt with me, understandably, but what's going to be okay? Can she shout at me? Or it may be he may be the betrayed partner. Can he shout at me? Can he hit me? Because maybe it's okay because, hey, he's really angry. I did things to hurt him. Sexual boundaries, which speaks for itself. I'm in a relationship in recovery. What's okay and not okay? Is sex okay? How do we define sex? So there's this spectrum about boundaries, emotional, sexual, and one of the real challenges and one of the myths about boundaries is that I can't have boundaries because they will lead to me being rejected. Often hear that. Having personal boundaries is selfish. And I'd say actually it's the opposite. It's the selfless. That's what a boundary is. What a boundary isn't, and it tends to happen a lot in recovery, is I need you to do this. And if you don't do this, I'm out the door. Or, hey, I'm an addict. I'm working hard in my recovery. My therapist says you need to show up for me and you need to do this. That's not a boundary. That's a demand, and it's probably not a very reasonable demand. But both of us, the addict and the betrayed spouse, we're carrying so much stuff that sometimes I don't even know what it is that's going to keep me safe. So for me, let's talk about how we set a boundary and what a healthy boundary is. We are going to take time for all your questions. So I'm going to make sure I don't go over talk for another kind of 15 minutes about setting a boundary. Then we're going to take the questions. So for me, boundaries are something that we negotiate with our partners. It's not something that there is going to be an exception, but as a rule of thumb, a boundary is something that two people sit down together. And I get it's not easy if right now you hate each other and there's so much resentment, but somewhere, and it may have to be with the therapist as your mediator, your couples therapist, both the addict and the betrayed spouse has the right to say, going forward, this is what I need to feel safe. And I understand that sometimes the stuff that the addict will need to do because they're having to ask for forgiveness. But that's not the same. The addict still has the right to say, this is what I need to feel safe, and this is what I need for my recovery. So two people sit down and they negotiate. They don't dictate, with the one caveat that I'll come on to. So how does it start? For me, it starts something along the lines of the conversation is going to start with an I statement. And because a lot of the time we're mind reading, I know what he's up to. I know what she's doing. When he picked up his phone, I know what he's doing. And before you know it, the whole thing has taken off. So let's say that's the example, actually. Let's say that I watched my addict spouse pick up his phone, and I know I'm suspicious of what he might be doing. So the first thing we do is we do the sensory data part. So we say something like, what I saw, what I noticed is. So what I saw was that you picked up your phone, and I noticed that you went in the other room. So firstly, I'm going to check in to make sure that this is real. Because sometimes if I'm triggered by my trauma, I don't always know what's real. And by the way, I'm not blaming the person who's triggered, which is possibly the betrayed spouse, because, hey, you've probably been gaslighted enough times. No wonder you don't know what's real. So that's not a criticism at all. So the first thing I do is what I saw is that you picked up your phone. And what I understand about that, or what triggered me, is that that's what you did when you were acting out. And what I feel is fearful, resentful, angry. And what I would like is when your phone rings for you not to go in the other room. That's the request. So let me just run through that again. It's the sensory data, what I saw or what I heard, what I noticed. What I make of that is, or what triggered me is, this is how I feel. This is what would make me feel safe. And then the two of you are going to discuss it. You're not going to defend, you're not going to interrupt, but I told you I've got software on my phone. I told you my sponsor said Don't defend what's been said. It's got nothing to do with you. Whoever is doing the communicating, it's all about them because their feelings are real. Because I think we have a tendency, all of us, to minimize, or if you're anything like me, I'll be defensive before you've even finished your sentence. Wait a minute, but nothing to do with me. My spouse is giving me information about their feelings. That's a gift, because then I have a chance to say, I can empathize. If I'm the addict, I can empathize. I understand why my phone ringing might trouble you, given everything I've done. You don't have to agree to the request. This is a discussion, but hopefully where you're both going to come out is what's reasonable. So is it reasonable that every time the phone rings, you have to show your spouse, let's say it's the male partner who's acted out, you're going to always have to show him the phone? Maybe. Maybe you're always at the end of the day going to show all of your phone calls. This is between you and your partner, and there's no right and there's no wrong. But it's about sharing with each other and coming to an agreement. So what you're going to end up with is under maybe physical space, under sexual boundaries, under time. You're almost going to have this contract that's fluid, that's going to change, that's negotiable, because then you'll work out, you know, that boundary we agreed, this isn't going to work because, okay, because now I'm traveling for work 3 days a week. Okay, let's go back to the contract. Let's relook at it. But you both sit down, negotiate, and discuss it. Now, you might need to do, I'm stressing it again with the therapist, because right now you may not be talking to each other. And the temptation is, I'll tell you what your boundary is, but it's not going to get you anywhere. It's only going to get you to a brick wall. So the last part of this, before I talk about the caveat, is what are you going to do if it doesn't happen? And this is where so often, and you'll know this, Tammy, so often this is where it falls down. And if you don't show me the phone, we'll get divorced. If you don't do this, if you don't allow me to go to my 12-step meetings, then my recovery will fail and I will leave, whatever it is. We go to the extreme because we're ending up being triggered. If it's the addict, I'm going to my child place, I'm going to my trauma, I might withdraw, I might become hypervigilant. So I come out with this crazy ultimatum. Forget, you might as well tear up your boundary contract. Useless. So what you need to think about is, this is about keeping me safe. It's not about control. It's not about punishment. So I might say, because if you keep looking at your phone, or if this happens, I might need to sleep in the other room, or I might need to bring this to our therapy. It's not about, you need to think about what is going to help you if this situation occurs, but not how can I punish him? How can I punish her? That's not what it's about. So I said there's a caveat, and I think the caveat is just note that each of us, addict or betrayed spouse, is going to have some boundaries that actually they are non-negotiable. And by that, I mean what they're going to say is that if this happens, so I feel hurt when you betray me, and what I would like to ask is that you tell me if you've had a slip, but if that isn't possible, here's what I will do. And the non-negotiables might be that if I discover I have another STD, the relationship is over. But you really need to know that that is what is going to happen if you discover, because the temptation is to punish. So we've got to work out that if we're trying to protect the kids, for example, you might say, if you, hopefully it's not going on, but if you touch the kids, I will leave the relationship. I will have to involve the law and the therapy. So just know that there are certain things where the request is very limited, because actually what you're doing is delivering information. And there won't be very many of those scenarios. What tends to happen is we've got loads of those and very few requests. So it's just really separating between the request and the non-negotiable boundary. And so I guess kind of in summary, it's just that as addicts, sometimes betrayed spouses, but not necessarily, we just don't grow up learning healthy boundaries. They're either really rigid or they're really porous. They're all over the place. Let me share a quote with you if I can find it, from a therapist I have a lot of time for. Terence Real says, when you are boundaryless, so when we've got no boundaries, which sometimes happens in these kind of toxic, dramatic, love-addicted relationships. So when you are boundaryless, you are connected, but not protected. On the other hand, when you are behind a wall, you are protected, but not connected. Neither is intimacy. So before you sit down with your partner, just have a think. Where have you tended to fall on that spectrum? Have your boundaries been used to keep people out, which is often the avoidant tendency? I don't want people to get too close. So I had a client say to me recently, my biggest fear is that if everybody got into the same room for all the different parts of my life, that would screw me up, because everyone's going to say, wait a minute, are we talking about the same person? Because this, what addicts often do, which is they have so many split off parts of their lives and no boundaries. So I can't remember how I got onto that. So it's just thinking about what was your relationship with boundaries? Did you keep, that's what I was talking about. Did you keep people out a lot? Really rigid boundaries because you were quite avoidant. You didn't want people to know too much about you. Lots of addicts do that because then they can be very manipulative. Then they can be very controlling because nobody knows too much about me. Or were you more the kind of my love addicted client example, which is just all over the shop? I let everybody walk all over me, and I was a people pleaser. Anybody that wanted anything from me. And the reason I ask you to reflect on it, because it's going to give you so many clues to your relationship, your dynamics, and where some of the healing might be. So I'm going to shut up at that point. I think Tammy is.
It's great information, and and you really pulled it back together with because I was like, well, what is the point of boundaries? And you're, like your example of where are you on the spectrum, and neither one of those extremes is helpful or produces intimacy and healthy connection. Keeps you safe or keeps you connected, but doesn't really do what we are really looking for, is safety in a healthy connection. I noticed that I had a little body reaction when you talked about time boundaries, and I thought, oh, there's some work for me to do, because I'm horrible. Like the phone will ring at 7 o'clock at night, and for work, and I'll answer it. Disregarding that, my spouse would probably like me to be paying attention to our relationship at the moment. So but I was immediately going, ooh, I have some work to do with that. I thought it was interesting that you used the I might need. I mean, it felt like a softer version of, but it also gave some room for, if you do this, I might need to sleep in the other room, or you might need to sleep in the other room. Now, I'd like you to talk about that. Do you find that more useful to have it be I might need? So I'm giving myself some latitude versus the, if you do this, you're going to sleep in the other room. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's a great question. I think it depends on what the boundary is, because I might not know. So again, I might want to first test it out with my partner. And so I'm going to leave myself some leeway. And the advantage of leaving myself some leeway is, what we don't want to do is set the boundary violation, which is if the consequence. If you do this, I'm going to do that. Then I don't do it, because my contract and my relationship is going to suffer. So I think if I'm not totally sure, now someone else might say, hey, you know what, that's too woolly, you're on the fence, but work out what works for you. I'm okay with if someone says, if you do that, I might need to, because then when it happens, you may not know how you're going to feel. The two of you will sit down and say, well, we put this in our contract, and I think I am going to sleep in the other room. But you may feel that strongly that for this boundary, I'm very clear that if this happens, I will do that. And I think allowing stuff to be fluid, allowing you to talk about it, and it's not set in stone. You can revisit it. Don't revisit it unilaterally. Sit down as a couple, and this is a contract that you can sit down, and when you have your weekly check-in, yeah, okay, so are we okay with our boundaries? Yeah, but you know what, last week, I don't think this, can you talk about it? And you talk about, and for me, the crucial part is the feelings. And the reason I did that part about the feelings is because in all relationships, addicts or not, we do the mind reading game. So it was obvious what I was feeling. You could tell what I was feeling. And I see that in the couples room. And I'm like, well, unless she's got psychic powers, if you don't actually say, I had a bad day and I'm feeling really anxious, how is she supposed to know? Because she's trying to get dinner ready for the kids and blah, blah, blah. She doesn't know this. So you thought it was obvious. And actually, it's quite a credit to the relationship that you expect your partner to be a mind reader. So the feelings is to be able to say, when you said you'd call when you were leaving the office and didn't, I felt neglected, or I felt, because it's information. So if I hear that, okay, I see how you felt. That wasn't my intention. And again, really hard to not be defensive. That exchange of information from the I statements. Remember, when we're doing that, it's always about the person doing the communicating. It's not about you and what you did.
And I love that you said when your partner, or when you're in a relationship, doesn't even have to be a partner, but when somebody is giving you that information, they're telling you how they feel, that is a gift. And I think if we remember it's a gift, that they want to be engaged with us, then hopefully that gives us a moment's pause to not just, be the defensive, like, well, let me, tell you, before you complete your sentence, I've got the answer for you. So, and I was thinking, when the kids are grown up, you said, use your words. And I think with addicts, it's like, use your words, like we have to learn to use the words. The I statements that you were using, I also use the story I'm telling myself. So Gavin, the story I'm telling myself, when I see you pick up the phone and you go to the other room and you're you're hushing your voice is, that type of thing. And then you can go, oh, I understand where you're coming from with that, but it also takes that, it keeps it in the present and less. I'm not just going, Gavin, when you do that, you're doing this to me, so it gives us space to communicate, which is, where everyone's, if we're going to be in a relationship, that's where the meat of the relationship is the communication. And and obviously tough stuff you shared, and I think it's a valid point to reiterate is, a lot of relationships are not in a space where they can communicate, on these negotiating, navigating things. Working with a qualified professional is, I can't stress it enough. Gavin shared his credentials. There are people that are trained to do this work, to help support that. We have a lot of resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com too, but really doing the work, for at least a while, you may need, to have the support of somebody who's a neutral party that can help you really navigate this stuff. So
one thing I wanted
go ahead.
To add, what I think about it is that, in the beginning, there probably will be more boundaries that the betrayed spouse needs to set. Because if I'm the betrayed spouse, my whole, I don't know what's safe. I don't know what's real and what's not. So it may well be that actually I have a lot more boundaries of the things that I will do because I've been betrayed, and now I don't want to be betrayed or hurt again. So this is where in the beginning, I will sometimes say to the addict, assuming that it's reasonable, that's the way it is. Rob's written about this beautifully in his Out of the Doghouse book. It's that moment when, let's assume it's the guy, you are going to have to suck it up a bit. You're trying to rebuild the trust. However, the addict, and so in that point, by the way, early on, what the addict's doing, for them, the boundaries are the kind of their three circles. And I know you're about to start a wonderful group talking about how does the addict use their three circles to actually define what is sexual sobriety. So that's what boundaries are very often for the addict. However, in the relationship, the addict still gets to say what makes them feel safe. So sometimes it is, I am being verbally abused, or I am being, I'm being followed, or I'm whatever it is. The addict still gets to say, I understand what's, I've hurt you, and I understand why you might ask this. However, I can't phone you every 15 minutes, or I can't. So we still have to be able to, both addict and betrayed spouse, even though the weight is going to be towards safety for the betrayed spouse, sometimes I think what gets lost is he's got no rights. And we're human beings, and we're all doing hopefully the best we can. And we've all got the right to feel safe and to be in healthy relationships.
And that's the point. That's the point of all of this, is to be in healthy relationships. So he's got no rights, or she's asking too much, or whatever. Like, it doesn't bring us into healthy connection. So Dr. Stan Tatkin talks about we do, and in a healthy relationship, the two of us being in a partnership moving forward, which of course, in early on in all of this process, that is probably the last thing you can even imagine. But if you can have this vision of, like, ultimately we're still in this, like the simple thing is, get rid of the relationship, get rid of the problem, which isn't reality. I mean, obviously there's still, healing to do, but in an easy world, you just go, I'm getting a divorce. It's going to be behind me. I'm going to move on. If you're still in a relationship, that means you're still working to navigate this. You're still trying to figure out, how do we move forward in a different way? So then how do we do this so that it's good for the relationship and good for each of us? That's the goal. You mentioned the work group, and I'm going to elaborate on that. The Sex Addiction 101 Level 1 work group starts again tomorrow. So if you're here live, it's December 2nd. We offer this monthly. It's a 6-week work group where it's live facilitated. It's online, so people from all over the world, are joining it. But it's live facilitated to process through that. It's psychoeducation. It is not therapy. It is not treatment, but it really does help support the work that you're doing in conjunction with a therapist or whatever as well. So you'll find that on the seekingintegrity.com site. Obviously, free resources. See, I got to go. Seeking Integrity is here. The sex and relationship healing is where all the free resources, the podcasts, webinars, and drop-in groups are. But we have a bunch of questions, so we're going to get to those. So, what are appropriate consequences for an addict if he violates a boundary agreement? And that's an interesting way to phrase it. So, so what I heard you say is, if you violate this, I might move to the other bedroom, or he might move to the other. And I'm using gender, he for the addict, she for the partner, just for clarification, male or female, so it's only for clarification. Addicts and partners are both male, female, it doesn't matter. So, but what do you think, what is your take on the appropriate consequence of an addict who violates a boundary agreement?
I think it's for the betrayed partner to decide, because I actually quite like the question, because I like that the person's asked, okay, so what's appropriate? So for me, where that takes me is, okay, so at least you're thinking about, I don't want to make this unreasonable demand. So I think it is, and this is where it comes to the boundaries about my needs. So if I'm the betrayed partner, what is it that I need if he does this? I might need him to go to and have an extra therapy session. I might need him to know that he has told his sponsor. The consequences are what is going to keep you feeling safe. And even the word consequences, I kind of think I keep for the non-negotiables, which is I will move out, I'll ask you to move out. I kind of almost prefer the slightly softer of the, what are we agreeing will happen? And again, it's not because I'm going all soft, it's because when we make it so black and white, we don't leave ourselves much room. And yes, sobriety is black and white, but it's the next part that what we're talking about. So long-winded answer, work out what feels right for you, because if it's right for you, there's your answer.
Yeah, and I think even having the discussion of if I'm an addict and I'm hearing the partner say, this is going to be so painful for me that this is going to have to be the consequence, or I might have to do this, hopefully I'm going, oh, wow, I'm taking that in, that this is information that my partner is gifting me, that, this is serious. And if I want to continue to work on the relationship, if I want to be in this moving forward, I need to do some things to make sure that I am able to stay on this side of the boundary. So go ahead.
About it, sometimes what can happen in relationships is that the betrayed spouse, and I hear this sometimes in my Thursday group, that the betrayed spouse, well, this is what sometimes the addicts is saying, so it doesn't mean this is actually what's happening.
It's true.
But what the addict sometimes is saying is that the betrayed spouses are becoming another sort of sponsor or therapist. And this is just my view as therapist. I don't think that serves anyone. I don't want my spouse to be my sponsor. I don't want my spouse. It's not fair to make my spouse accountable in this. And I think then what happens is, I saw one recently where someone had come to see me after seeing another therapist, and what the boundary was that if I have any fantasies, I must disclose it. And if I continue to have fantasies, the consequences are. Now, there's another webinar here about fantasy and where do we put that, because I'm not someone that tends to bottom line a fantasy, but we can find that somewhere else another time. However, the point I wanted to raise is, try, if we can, to not confuse a boundary with I'm controlling my partner's recovery and sobriety, because I think it's not the betrayed spouse's duty. You might want to be informed about it, that's okay. But try to make, hopefully if the addict is in recovery, they're working with a CSAT and they have a sponsor who are holding them accountable, and ultimately the addict is accountable. So that was just a bit of a going off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, but I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, I'm moving because my computer is about ready to run out of juice. I've been in too many meetings, but I was thinking about that with the partner, and like I can only imagine how traumatizing it is for a partner to constantly hear every time somebody has a fantasy. It's like they need to do the work. We often say, the partner needs their support and the addict needs their support, but having the partner be so focused on, and then going, what does that fantasy mean to that person? And, like, oh, that feels traumatizing to me for the partner's sake. So, okay. Can you speak on the importance of sexual boundaries between the betrayed and the SA when abstinence has not happened, the time period needed to reset the brain? Dr. Rob has talked about the reset the brain, but what do those boundaries look like, please? So
run it past me once more, please, Tammy.
Okay, you should be able to see the Q&A too. So
okay, let me
so
go
open it up because then you can read it too. But it says, can you speak on the importance of sexual boundaries between the betrayed and the SA when abstinence has not happened for the period of time that they perceive that it was needed to reset the brain, and what do those boundaries look like, please? So
okay, so the importance of the sexual boundaries between the betrayed and the sex addict when abstinence hasn't happened in the time period need to reset the brain. So I think, again, it's almost feels a little bit like possibly in the question that, I don't think that the time to reset the brain is that definite. I mean, I think there are parts, and Rob is far more qualified and much more of an expert about the resetting of the neural pathways. But to me, I think it's about, let me take a step back, which is kind of what is recovery? And recovery is a journey for both the addict and for the betrayed spouse. And so the addict is it's not going to look perfect. It's not going to happen in a perfect time frame. So I think it's between the betrayed spouse and the addict to kind of negotiate, which is, if you have a slip, then I would like to know about it. It may be if you have another affair or if you go with a prostitute, I will leave you. So again, it depends on what we mean by abstinence. So, a common slip for a sex addict is masturbation. And we have to work out what does that mean for the relationship? And for me, it would mean you had a slip. Okay, let's understand what it means. I'm not there to judge it. I just want to understand, take it into your relationship, and you can say, you know what, honey, I had a slip and I did masturbate and this is what I'm doing about it. So I'm using very loose terms because I don't know what abstinence is going to mean for that person. And I'm also realistic, and hopefully I'd say it to a couple in front of me. This is what a recovery might look like. So you both have to kind of work out, if this bit gets breached, what does that mean? So if it's masturbation, what does it mean? If it's another visit to a prostitute, what does that mean? And so does that answer the question, or have I
well, she adds sex in the marriage is the abstinence, but Dr. Rob talks often about, do you want to have sex with somebody you don't trust? So if it's less about resetting the brain, it's like, is he showing up in ways where you feel trust, that he is trustworthy? So, and if you need to start an abstinence period because something has been breached, start another one. So, but I think it's really, if we go back to, what is safety for you? It's again, the boundary isn't about him. It's like, what is safety for you? What, is, and again, no judging it, it's really, if it's working for the two of you, great. But if you're going like, I don't feel like, like, I think he's thinking about all kinds, he's got porn images running through his head when we're having sex. If the point of sex per se, is for connection for the two of you, then maybe that's not the right thing for the moment. So, okay. So next question is, I am the addict, sex and porn. How can boundaries be negotiated when the violated spouse does not want to allow for boundaries? Degrading language, threats, shaming, rage are what I have in mind.
Okay. So yeah, so I can feel for the addict who's asking the question here, which is that, I have a spouse who I'm going to make an assumption is, maybe still experiencing some PTSD type symptoms. And so this is where, as you said earlier on, help of a professional, which is someone who can say, if I had that couple in front of me, I would say, look, you're in a relationship, so I'm going to make an assumption that you're here to work at it. This doesn't serve either of you very well. And so again, for the addict, if you are not prepared to have degrading language and to be threatened, what are your consequences? And so they may not be dramatic. They may be that I feel humiliated when you shout at me. And what I'd like to ask is that you don't degrade me, humiliate me. And if you do, I will leave the conversation. So sometimes we can tell, and it isn't a storming out of the room. It's saying, I do want to have the discussion with you. I do want to talk to you, but I don't feel safe or comfortable doing it right now. And I will be back later, and you leave the room. So again, I would take it to couples therapy, but if it's not okay with you to be shouted at, it wouldn't be okay with me, and to be in that level of abuse, I would communicate it. But you need to know what your consequence is, because what probably happens is it keeps happening because the boundary hasn't been set. And that's why this destructive pattern keeps happening, because the addict often feels, well, I have to, given everything I put her through, I have to do this. And the answer is,
or I deserve it.
Thank you. I deserve it because I'm a worthless piece of, so I deserve it because who else would do this to their spouse? I hear it so much in the Thursday group with the addicts that really have now, fortunately, in some respects, they're in touch with how much pain they've hurt their spouse. And that gets mistaken. Thank you for bringing that into, but I deserve it. And the answer is, no, you don't. So hopefully that answers the question.
Well, and so I want to bring up two things. So if you joined late or you're watching this video, the Thursday group, Gavin runs, he hosts the Thursday men's group on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. We have multiple drop-in groups for male addicts. We have for female addicts and female partners, et cetera, too, on that platform. And those are safe spaces where, people can bring what's going on to them, or on to the platform and discuss it, in a safe place. But I also wanted to tag on to what Gavin was saying, have the conversation not in that moment, about like, I want to have a plan because this isn't helpful for us. So this is going, if you start, being degrading and shaming to me, I might have to leave the room. I might take a time out. But have that not in the heat of the moment, because otherwise it'll feel like, you're storming out. And then I'm going to come back and then we're going to try again. And because I do want to hear you. But I find that having those conversations in a calm moment about, then your brain is, is still online, because in the heat of the moment, it's like all bets are off. So it's one of those things where you can set up the scenario for having that particular boundary. But I agree. I mean, physical violence, language that is degrading, any of those kind of things are not helpful for either of you or for the relationship. So finding a different way to do it.
And I often say to couples, you remind me of that, which is have your scheduled time when you get to talk about this, when you schedule when your arguments will be, which is quite useful because usually we've calmed down a bit. And listen, it's really hard if you've been triggered and something's been touched. So I empathize with every betrayed spouse that wasn't able to say, you know what, let's have the argument at 4 o'clock this afternoon, because when we're triggered. So we have to work on how we manage the triggers. But the ideal is, can we schedule for at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock when the kids are asleep? Because what happens is every single piece of dialogue gets framed through the lens of betrayal. So you take the garbage out because you're the one who cheated. You drive the kids to school because you're the one who cheated. Or you know, or it could be the addict is acting out, you know, with the you know, in some way with the betrayed spouse. And so rather than have everything, we need to communicate, particularly if there are kids, and we need to find a way to get on with our day-to-day life. So make, if you can, a pact that we're not going to talk about our triggers and we're not going to talk about the addiction, except between our check-in time between 7 and 8. And we're going to have a script, work on it with your CSAT. We're going to have a script that we stick to, where each of us gets to make our I statements and each of us gets to be acknowledged and validated.
And I think that's important. And it's okay to have, you know, like on my phone, I can take notes. So I can have a little note about, you know, that journaling. We've talked about that in other webinars and things. Like, you may want to journal about it so you've kind of processed through before you have the conversation. I mean, there's so many different ways. Talk to your support. Like, I was so triggered by this, you know, wondering what that means for me, you know. So it's not just the trigger. It's like, now I have more of a holistic understanding of what, you know, what it really was. So somebody put in a, go ahead.
Whilst I remember, because now I'm just kind
of,
I'm going off and I won't stop.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I noticed that addicts, and I don't know if this is to do with boundaries or not, but addicts and partners tend to do is we tend to get very good at telling our partners what's happening for them. Oh, you're triggered now. And actually, it may be true, but when we do that, it's not helpful, because we're back to the mind reading. So save it for the I feel what I see, rather than you're triggered, or it could be you're on the phone, you're acting out. But I see addicts doing it a lot to the betrayed spouses. And then it almost has, you're taking away any empathy, because what you're doing is preventing her from coming forward and saying how she's feeling. And nobody wants to be told, rightly or wrongly, you're triggered, you're having a reaction to this. Not the way to approach it, if we can.
If the goal is to better communication, to have a healing experience, you know, doing those kind of things just, you know, keep shooting it in the foot. So somebody put in the comments, and I wanted to pull this one out. Mr. Sharpe said the temptation is to punish when setting up a non-negotiable. Could you please elaborate on that and how to avoid that temptation?
Sure. So I think that if we've been hurt, I really want to make it clear that I'll tell you what the consequence is for you. If you do this again, you won't see the children. And that's not a boundary, that's a threat. The boundary is, what do I need? And so it's not about trying to control or punish. So the boundary would be, if you do this, I think I am going to ask you to sleep in the other bed, because I will feel more safe, or because I will be hurt. But it's not because I want you to suffer. It's only about me. This is the stuff that's going to keep me healthy and grounded. And of course, there's a part of you that has so much anger that, of course, you're human and you want there to be a consequence. Because sometimes for the betrayed spouse, it's like, how does he get away with it? And I almost wish sometimes the betrayed spouse could, it's not going to happen, but could come into the Thursday group and sometimes see the level of pain, the tears when the addict says, I can't believe I did this because I breached my own moral values. But of course, the addict thinks, the betrayed spouse rather thinks, but they've got away with it. And so, you know, it's not always the way. So the temptation is, I'm going to punish. So hopefully that answers the question.
That was helpful. So the next question is, if you have a boundary agreement and a consequence, like if he masturbates, won't he most likely hide it and not be honest and transparent about the violation?
It's, you know, it's possible. But what we're hoping is that the addict is doing their work in recovery. I'm just trying to find the question because I just want to make sure.
It's the top one in the open.
If the boundary
and the Q&A.
So yeah, if you're and a consequence like masturbates, will you most likely hide it and not be honest? Yes, it's possible. But what we're hoping is going on in a healthy relationship is, and this is where actually, without making it punitive and with it being I would like to be informed, you've got a much greater chance of the addict not getting so lost in their shame that they hide it. So yes, it's possible, but I'm hoping that what you're doing is building up so much trust between you and trust between the addict and his sponsor and his therapist and his group that actually the addict wants to say, you know what, I'm recovering, I've slipped, and I want to share it with you. So that's my view. There are no guarantees with any of this.
Right. And and I think the consequences have to match. So like masturbates is one thing, and it might be, you need to go to a meeting every day for the next, whatever. You need to call your sponsor right away. You need to go see your therapist. Like, would somebody masturbating be, we need to get a divorce? That would be, to me, an extreme. And, I'm going to say he is, unlikely to tell you. But if the consequence, more matches, if he, went out with a sex worker, then, we're going to get STD tests. We're going to, so making sure that it's it matches is what I'm trying to say. I'm not doing a very good job, but the level is.
You are, and actually, to be honest with you, a lot of the time addicts actually will flourish with boundaries because it's the very thing they didn't have. So a lot of the time the addict knows, okay, I know what to do. I have that's why we call it the fire drill plan. I know now that if this happens, this is my support network. This is what I'm going to share with my spouse. I have a framework, which I never had my whole life. I didn't even know what healthy sex was. So, that's my two cents, as they say, on your side of the pond.
Okay, so for an essay, do the 3 circle boundaries change as sobriety increases, or is it a general rule that they never change once they are set up to keep you slowly going back to old acting out behaviors?
Great question. Definitely check in on your Sex Addiction 101. I would say, again, it's so individual. So there will be some things that will change. Look, the goal for me, if I'm working with a sex addict or a couple, I want you to have the healthiest relationship. I want you to have the best sex possible. So there will be some things, now we're going to the reset the brain bit, there will be some things that for the addict, at one point, we're in that middle circle, or in the, right in the center, the inner circle, and actually, now they're not, because now actually that has been processed, it's been understood. So I think there will be some things, for example, sex outside the primary relationship is probably never going to leave unless you have an agreed open relationship. So that's always going to be there. You may decide, the addict may decide, I know what I can never do. I can never have a massage with a female masseuse because I'm going to get triggered. So I've decided to leave it in my middle circle, and I've discussed it with my spouse. You are going to work out what great sex looks like for you as a couple. So again, we're back to talking about it, discussing, and you will define what your sobriety looks like.
And I'm going to add, one of the things that just didn't get talked about is, what is your outer circle? That's the healthy behaviors. And I sure hope that is changing, because you're finding more and more ways to be connected in real and meaningful ways with the other, with the rest of the world. In my world, my healthy stuff has changed because I've found more things that I've been interested in doing and connecting with different people. So my husband and I are back to taking our dance lessons. How exciting is that? That would have not been in my outer circle stuff, I didn't know I wanted to do that. So yes, I hope that it's a meaningful, thing that, that, and you each have, we talk about having a 3 circle with partners, because like you should understand what is healthy and nourishing for you. And hopefully you are increasing that as well. I mean, I think with the 3 circle, we get really focused on what's in the inner circle. Those are the absolute no's, and the middle circle, well, those are the danger zones. But, living life is the outer circle stuff. That's the great stuff. So, okay, next question appears to be a series. So what about the sex addict? Wait, what about the sex addict that continues to play in the yellow zone, gaslight, manipulate, control, put off this spouse? Let's talk about what boundaries the addict needs. He views any consequence as punishment. So he's not in recovery, clearly. But the middle question, I feel like, what do you as a partner need for boundaries? Because if you remember what we started talking about, is it's, for the safety, an addict's boundaries are going to be, what does he need to do for his recovery? What does he need to do? That type of thing. So I'm going to flip this. What do you need to do to set safety for you as a partner? And, his view of any consequence as punishment goes back to, he's missing the point of, what boundaries really are. It's for safety and healthy. Gavin started off talking about that, it's not just about recovery, it's for life. It's, boundaries are how we navigate life with other people, for our safety. So I feel like he's missing a lot of that. Sounds like he'd be a great candidate for the Seeking Integrity treatment program, quite frankly. So, but Gavin, what are your thoughts on this?
Tammy, I absolutely concur, because gaslighting in a relationship, this is, for me, this is an emotional boundary. So I need you to be completely truthful with me, and if violated, I will, because it's not okay. And there's something in this person's recovery. I agree completely. It's not recovery isn't. He's not either not working recovery. Well, actually, he's not working recovery, because once we get to the point where we're in recovery, we know if we're gaslighting and we know if we're manipulating. So I'd like to think the addict has a therapist that will call him out on his, I won't use the word, but that's the beauty of seeing a CSAT, because I will sit in front of someone who's doing that and I will say, I don't believe you, or you're lying. And so completely, what is it that the betrayed spouse needs? If you lied to me, or, I'm aware that you are gaslighting me, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, well, and I feel for you, the partner. Please hear that. I know how devastating this is. I feel for him, the addict, because he's living in the horrible spot where supposedly not acting out, which is how, I call it the maladaptive coping mechanism. So if you're not doing that, but you don't have any recovery skills, you're lying and manipulating and, and blame shifting. And I mean, that's the horrible spot. And with chemical, it's a dry drunk. So I'm not drinking, but man, I'm just as nasty as, as when I was, that's a not good place to be in.
I wonder whether there's been a disclosure, because one of the advantages after a disclosure is that the addict is sometimes so relieved. That's not the intention, but it is one of the effects, that the addict feels that finally I've told my story. I don't need to lie anymore. This is it. I've laid everything out. And so I wonder if there's been a disclosure, or if there's been a full disclosure. There may be something to revisit, because if there's still gaslighting going on, as you say, we both agree, something in the addict's recovery isn't working.
Yeah, I wouldn't even be able to use recovery with what I'm reading. And I know I'm just reading one component of it, but I take to heart that that's what you're feeling. So you, as a betrayed partner, remember that we have betrayed partner support on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There's one this afternoon, 12:30 Pacific time. Join that. And there's another one tomorrow morning. There's multiple. So keep joining that. if you are a male and an addict, please join Gavin's group on Thursday mornings. He was even on Thanksgiving because it wasn't Thanksgiving in Monaco, so he was there, with the group. But please continue to join those free resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. The work group that I mentioned, the Sex Addiction 101 Level 1, starts tomorrow. 90 minutes, 6 weeks in a row. We offer them monthly, but that's on the seekingintegrity.com site. If you have questions, please email me, Tammy, TAMI at seekingintegrity.com. And you can reach Gavin. What's the best way to reach you if they're looking for you?
If you want, my website is rivierawellbeing.com, and you can email me, Gavin at rivierawellbeing.com. And there was one thing I wanted just to finish by saying that I wanted to say at the start, which is that one of the things that I think it was Henry Cloud who talks about is that all of us deserve to voice our truth and to be able to communicate our needs. And if we don't, he calls it a betrayal of the self. And for me, and it really resonates with me, because that's what, if I don't establish boundaries, the person I'm betraying is me, because I have the right, addict or betrayed spouse, to be safe, and in that relationship, to communicate what is going to make me safe. So I just wanted to add it because I wanted to say at the beginning, and I just looked at my notes and realized.
No, that's a perfect way to end this. So thank you so much for your time today. It was very beneficial for me. I hope, those joining live, felt as well. So, and I appreciate so much your ongoing volunteerism on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com. So we'll have to do this again sometime though. So I'm gonna call you.
I mean, to you and to Dr. Rob, because you, through the Sex Relationship Healing, put out more free resources to the community than I don't know anybody else globally. So I love to be part of it, and I love that you have had the initiative and all of you give your time to it. So right back at you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.